Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. Now that David Johnston has stepped down as the Prime Minister's Special Rapporteur on the allegations around foreign interference, the question of a public inquiry has reopened itself. And so I figured I would take a few minutes to go through the Inquiries Act to kind of give a sense of what's in it and what it means for a possible public inquiry in this regard. So first of all, it's a very short bill. It's only 15 clauses. It's in 4 parts. The main one is that we're concerned with is part 1, which is public inquiries. Part 2 is around departmental investigations, which is not really relevant in this particular case. Part 3 is some general provisions around employing counsel or experts to assist in an inquiry, and the particular powers that they possess, which is kind of goes back to part 1, which we'll go into. And then part 4 is around international commissions and tribunals, which again is just empowering the government to appoint to these with the same powers that are in part 1. So we go to part 1 on public inquiries. And right up at the top, and this is important for what the conversation is, the Governor and Council, meaning Prime Minister and Cabinet advising the Governor General, may, whenever the Governor and Council deems it expedient, cause inquiry to be made into and concerning any matter connected to the good government of Canada or the conduct of any part of the public business thereof. And again, the part that's we're concerned about is that this is a Governor and Council issue. This is not a Parliament issue. This is government. And that's important for the discussion going on around how the opposition wants a public inquiry into foreign interference set up and the buy-in that they wanted to have into it. And so the next section 3, appointment of commissioners, where an inquiry as described in section 2 is not regulated by any special law, such as the Emergencies Act. The Governor and Council may, by a commission, appoint persons as commissioners by whom the inquiry shall be conducted. Again, Governor and Council makes this appointment. Now, the opposition in this particular case wants essentially to have their own say in terms of who a commissioner would be. And this is one of the problems inherent in these kinds of demands for opposition input into a situation like this, because what that winds up doing is laundering accountability. Now, when it's a Governor and Council appointment, that means that the government is responsible for what happens. And that means they're responsible for not only the conduct of the commissioners, but also the terms of reference for the commission and how it plays out. So if things go off the rails, that falls onto the government. If they set it up in a particular way that is designed to get an outcome, that falls on the government, which is the whole point of why Parliament holds government to account. Now, if Parliament wants a buy-in on these kinds of appointments, then that means that Parliament becomes responsible. And when everyone is responsible, then no one is responsible. And that's why we structure things in a particular way. And I don't know that there's enough of an appreciation in the discourse for what this is supposed to mean. Commissioners are not supposed to be officers of Parliament. Officers of Parliament are very special in terms of the way that Parliament appoints them, because they report to Parliament on issues. This is not a report to Parliament issue, and that's something we need to keep in mind with all the various demands around what this is supposed to accomplish. The next portion is the powers of commissioners concerning evidence. And this is what a lot of people point to as to why they think they want a public inquiry. which is that commissioners have the power of summoning before them any witness and requiring them to give evidence orally or in writing, and on oath, or if they are persons entitled to affirm in civil matters on solemn affirmation, which means you swear or you affirm. That's what it means. And to be produce such documents and things that as commissioners deem requisite for the full investigation of the matters in which they are appointed to examine. And yeah, so this notion that they can, and I'll include section 5 in here as well. Commissioners have the same power to enforce the attendance of witnesses and to compel them to give evidence as is vested in any court of record in civil cases. So this is what a lot of people seem to think, that why a public inquiry is necessary is because they can compel people to appear and to give evidence. But the problem with this particular foreign interference issue is that this is largely a government process issue, which is what David Johnston's report was trying to get at, and he was pretty scathing about it. This is not an issue of, compelling people to submit documents around what kind of interference they've experienced or so on. This is about the government's processes they know that this interference is happening, and what are they doing about it, and how are different levels of government informing one another and the processes involved. And this is why I have problems understanding why a public inquiry would be necessary. The government knows that these problems are there. They've turned over all the documents. They don't have to compel anyone to appear because this is an internal government issue. And so this is why I wonder again as to just the necessity of putting in a public inquiry format, because if the notion is that you are conducting a wide-ranging inquiry into all kinds of foreign interference, and you get people from diaspora communities and so on, and that you feel the need to compel some of them to testify because many of them are reluctant to, again, this is kind of turning into a bit of a side issue, because we know that the interference is happening. Diaspora communities have already told us how it's happening. So I'm failing to see the point of why we need a judge to compel people to testify when we already know what they're going to say. And doing so at a greater time scale and at much more expense than what David Johnston was doing and in the role he was playing. And so this is why I have questions as to why a public inquiry would be necessary. And anyway, that is the sum total of what we are concerned about in the Inquiries Act. Like I said, it's a very short piece of legislation, and for the matters that concern a public inquiry, there's not a lot in there. But just we need to pay attention to the fact that these are government processes. This is not a parliamentary process, and that reason is because Parliament needs to be able to hold government to account for this process. And by involving Parliament, that launders the accountability. That means that everyone is responsible and no one is responsible. And we've had these problems before, and nobody seems to learn that particular lesson. So this is kind of where we're at. Dominic LeBlanc, he's the Minister for Democratic Institutions, who the Prime Minister has tasked with next steps on this particular issue, says he wants the opposition to come up with a name for a commissioner and the terms of reference, probably knowing full well that there's going to be no unanimity in this, and they're going to spend the next several months fighting, and the government will say, you broke it, you bought it. Credit to Susan Delacourt for that. And that's kind of where we're at. We've just taken this entire process off the rails. Nobody's going to want to be a commissioner of this particular toxic well. Nobody's going to want to volunteer for the character assassination that's to come. There is absolutely nobody, I can pretty much guarantee you, who is going to meet the criteria that every opposition leader is going to demand. And we're going to be stuck with things not happening. Well, hopefully, the government will take what they learned from the Johnston report and start doing the internal processes in government that needs to happen to fix the culture around intelligence and moving it up the chain. So that's kind of where we're at, and that's how the Inquiries Act works, and we'll see what the next steps are from the opposition parties. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith, that's at journo_Dale on Twitter, and don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.